I hereby call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, December 5th, 2022. The time is 8:02 a.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Amy Paling.
Here.
John Cesaretti.
Here.
Ann Hart.
Here.
Bonnie Kim.
Here.
Frank Panzica.
Here.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes.
Here.
Aaron Stone.
Here. I seek a motion to approve the minutes of the November 7th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Board members, are there any comments, errors, or omissions? Will the clerk please call the roll?
John Cesaretti.
Yes.
Ann Hart.
Yes.
Bonnie Kim.
Yes.
Frank Panzica.
Here.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes.
Yes.
Aaron Stone.
Yes.
And Amy Paling.
Yes. Did you get Frank's clarification?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Terrific. Motion carries. So we will begin with Facility Development Committee and Mr. Panzica.
Today's a good day because we're going to be going over the bids that I know there's been a lot of time spent on. So when we're ready, Corey, we'll have a summary.
Yeah. All right. So Joe Papanikolas is going to talk a little bit about the bid results, and then when he's done, I have just 3 slides I want to share with everybody before we can open up for discussion. Go ahead, Joe.
Good morning.
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 All right, it's an exciting day.
Is that on?
Is this on?
It's not on yet.
There we go, much better. All right, exciting day today. Just a recap of the bid structure. So we generated 6 base bids, as well as 7 add alternates to create sort of ultimate bid day flexibility. So what's being recommended today, just high level from a budget standpoint. So back in May 2022, apples for apples, sort of scope for scope, we were at 14.4 million for baseline budget for cost of construction. Per the bid openings here on December 1st, we're at just over 13.7. So we're about 4.9% less than anticipated. So we're extremely happy with the bid results. It was a lot of hard work from the entire team. So again, we're extremely happy with the position that we're in, and it allows that flexibility for the board to make decisions which you feel is best for the district. So we had great coverage through all the bid packages. We had 3 bid packages: general trades, mechanical, and electrical, all from competent contractors. The bids were tight, which usually means that the bid documents were very accurate, which is great. Hopefully that's less unforeseen situations during the summer. Within the bids, there is allowance value. So we have about $600,000. Not about, we have $600,000. So it's about 4% contingency. So we're in the ideal situation. Is there any questions?
John?
Yes. So that's a bid tabulation sheet. So when you have a lot of base bids and you have a lot of alternates, you have lots of cells. So each page has a bid package on there. So you'll see general trades is bid package 1, and then the names on the left-hand side are the contractors that submitted a bid. And then those values are their submitted bids for each of the base bids. So base bid 1 and 2 are representative of Central and Ramona. And then we created a base bid 3 for the combined in case a contractor feels there's some economies of scale. It puts the district in a position to take advantage of that discount. And then base bids 4 and 5 are Harper and Highcrest. And then again, the combined for Harper Highcrest would be base bid 6. So they're all standalone. So the highlighted are the low, it's the low combination of bids submitted, which equals, if you take all the highlighted base bids as well as the recommended alternates, that equals the 13,732,720. So sort of a little bit of a puzzle, recapping it. Just depends on which alternates we'd be looking at recommending and which base bids and so forth. So that's kind of where we're at.
A question on base bid 5, there's a huge, if I understand this right, Monarch bid less, 50% less than another guy. Are you worried at all about?
Is it 50% less? That would be a pretty large differential.
Yeah, so they were 50% less than integrated, but if you go to the bottom, RB Construction and Monarch,
Yeah.
they're both have won work for us in the past. They're pretty close to
Pretty
each
close,
other.
right.
So,
Yeah, so I do scope reviews with all the apparent low bidders. So we open the bids, we see who the apparent low responsible bidders are, and then I talk and do a scope review with each of them, just to confirm that they understand what the intent of the plans and specs are. So they've all confirmed that they're good with their bid, and that's it. And
Okay, just
yeah,
a little further.
yeah. If there was that differential between the second and the apparent low, that's something that would be very concerning. But like Corey said, the second contractor there has quite a bit of experience in 39 as well. So, and they were pretty close.
Do you have a breakout, even approximate, of how much the equipment that we need to order early adds up to?
The mechanical order, I believe it was just north of 800,000, if I remember correctly. 820 rings a bell, but it's definitely around 800,000.
That's enough.
And that's between chillers, univents, everything from a mechanical standpoint.
They're still talking lead times of 6 months to infinity.
The univents are 8 to 9 weeks, so we're going to be receiving those early. So those will be stored. And then the ship dates right now for chillers are August.
So what does that mean if it's a best case scenario and they go in August?
The best case scenario, we're prepared to put them in right away, and then we have to overlap with the start of year. Kind of what we're doing now. I mean, Mackenzie is January, so we'll do that over spring break. Hopefully it doesn't get pushed out that far. Hopefully they come early, but I think we're going to be experiencing a lot of the lead time supply chain issues again for this coming summer. So
Can you just remind us how much work is with installing the chiller once it's there? How much time?
yeah, I want to say it was a couple of weeks at the most. So spring break we'll be able to install it because we're prepared to install it. All the piping is there. It's ready to take the chiller, so the turnover will be relatively quick.
What did you say, a couple of weeks?
Once, just to physically install it and then get it operational, assuming all the infrastructure is ready to go, which would be the case in the summer. Again, we get weekly updates from the manufacturers and the reps, but right now it's an August ship date.
It's a good starting point at least. Is it an advantage to having the two construction firms? Does it look like now it would be the recommendation to have one do two and the other do two others? Is that
Sure,
an
when it comes to
advantage?
labor, yeah, to split it up, that's helpful. It's amazing how much the work did get split up. I mean, we have 4 different mechanical contractors. General trades was split up, and same with electrical. They were all split up, so we were happy to see that. So you're not throwing all your eggs in one basket.
Any other highlights that you found interesting or helpful?
We're all pleasantly surprised.
Good.
Yeah.
Any
It
other
really is. This is the best position you could be in. So we're not having discussions over, bidders that miss something or a base bid or a bid that came in substantially higher than anticipated. It's all positive. The only one concern would be obviously the lead time on mechanical equipment, but that's still the case across the board. Every project we do, every district, it's every manufacturer. And the best we can do is just continue getting our updates. And even last year, I mean, updates were pretty positive up till like May, and then all of a sudden, new ship dates came. And then another new ship date. It's sort of a moving target.
I just wasn't sure I understood the Alt C1, Alt C2. Can you explain that area?
So C1 was the temperature controls, right? So you want to talk a little bit about the scope of C1?
Oh, I see. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
So I know there's, I mean, there's contingency, et cetera, but just to kind of give a baseline. How much detail went into this in terms of identifying risks, in particular asbestos? I know until you open up walls, you don't really know, but I mean, how much of that, how little of that risk is anticipated? Just
When it comes to asbestos, we have a pretty good good handle. I mean, this is more for unforeseen items that may arise sort of outside, some unforeseen abatement. This is a placeholder that has proven adequate just from over the years of doing this, especially in D39. So 99% of the time, all the time, there's usually some leftover value of this contingency. So it's for unforeseen or maybe some owner added enhancement work. If we come across something, it's not a contractor slush fund or to, accommodate somebody's error or mistake. So this is purely for unforeseen conditions that might arise or owner added scope.
any other questions?
Just going back to the 4 chillers that are likely to come once school is under session. Is it workable, like as we're thinking about doing it this year during spring break and maybe beyond? How viable is school when you're working on installing the chillers?
Something that have to be coordinated with the district schedule.
So
I
can
mean,
you?
there's ways
school
of doing
happen?
it would be probably the current state that we're in right now, right? I mean,
Well,
certainly.
I guess I just wonder, when you're installing it, can kids be on site?
Oh, yeah, we would coordinate all that, certainly. So,
But I don't know what that means.
meaning we would do it second shift, we would
So
probably,
the answer is kids wouldn't be,
or we could possibly shift within the building itself, but if that's not possible, we want to limit the amount of overlap. We're not going to work over an occupied space. So if that needs to be second shift at the end of a day or over a weekend, or if it is going to be during the week, during normal work hours, we would have to make an adjustment inside to shift some rooms around potentially.
So I think your question is, would they be installing it with children attending to school at that moment? No.
That's, yeah.
Typically, what would happen is we would schedule it so that it's after hours. It could happen during a typical school term.
Yeah.
But it would happen after hours, or if it were in the summer term, we would maybe look to move kids around to a different classroom.
Right.
You wouldn't, it might be a little disruptive to be working just above an occupied learning space. So it could happen during the school term, but we would make arrangements so that it's not actually while students are learning.
Thank you. And if the work has to be done after a second shift or on the weekend to accommodate for that, is that reflected in the numbers here, or would?
So they're responsible for a lump sum value for the duration of the construction phase. So, I mean, this is a known going into the bid. Certainly, there'd be some exceptions if it was an extreme case, but I mean, with Mackenzie right now, with it coming so late, there's no additional cost for the contractor to come in over spring break to do it. So, to answer that, it would be within this bid. So.
Right, just for frame of reference and the board members' understanding of everything that's in front of them, do you want to touch on the blue document to walk them through that as well? And as you're kind of getting ready for that, I think if I'm understanding correctly, Joe, base bid 3 and base bid 6 were combo, kind of like asking for what would be the price of doing both of these schools together. And we didn't see advantages of that. And in fact, it just worked out the other way to have 2 schools with one organization and 2 with the other.
That's correct.
Thanks.
All right, so I just have a couple of quick thoughts that I wanted to share with everybody before we get any board direction. So I agree with Joe that the results were really good and solid. I particularly really like the splitting of the work amongst contractors in each of the bid packages. It would have been a little nerve-wracking if the same mechanical or something had 1, 3, or 4. But anyway, the first thing I want to do is, since this is the primary focus of these projects is air conditioning, I just wanted to go back to a couple of slides that I had shared back in June when we were talking about what we wanted to accomplish in the next 5 to 7 years. So this slide shows our large space air conditioning. And while that wasn't the focus of these projects for the next 5 to 7 years, as our engineer and design team were going through the buildings, at 2 buildings, we did have some very pleasant surprises. The first was that when they were designing, they realized that Central was already set up to really handle air conditioning. And more so than just the classrooms, it really wasn't going to take much of anything other than just to connect the auditorium and the small gym, which was the last 2 large spaces at Central that don't have AC, to add it. So that is included within the scope for Central to merely just hook it up. The piping and everything's already there per the engineer. So that is included, so that's great. And then at Ramona, they realized during the design phase that most likely for a relatively small amount of money, we would be able to potentially add the AC to the auditorium. We created it as an alternate because we weren't sure exactly what that number was going to kick out at. It ends up being like 111,000. We feel for the value, that's an incredible value to grab another large space at a school. If you think about it from a reference standpoint, one of the documents that Joe had prepared for us back in the spring showed that if we were to try and air condition a cafeteria at Ramona or a gym at Harper, we could be looking at 600,000 to 900,000 for just that. So to grab a large space for just 111 was what we felt was really good. So then this next slide shows where we were this past summer, percentage of classrooms that have AC. We had anticipated before the delay with the Mackenzie chiller, that second column, being able to have that one online, but we'll have that by spring. Potentially by next August, then we would have, or at some point during next school year, we would have 5 out of 6 schools with 100% of the classrooms with air conditioning. And then kind of having gone through this bid process and seeing our results from last year and going through the 5-year projections, our I've got that last column is potentially being able to come back in 2025 and grab and doing a project to add AC to the last dozen or so classrooms at the junior high. So I just wanted to kind of, there's a lot of work included in these bid packages or that we're hoping that the board will approve, but just want to try and summarize, you know, what we're accomplishing by moving forward with these projects. And then the last slide just has each school, what the total amount of the bid award that Joe referenced, the 13.7 million. So at Central, you have, you know, the base bid to add air conditioning, then the alternate to do the temperature controls. The reality is during the design process, we normally would have included, you know, some control updates within the base bid. But to order to have some flexibility on the back end, not knowing how bid results were going to go, we put it as an alternate. And then the C2 was the ComEd work. You see there for Harper, the other alternates were the mech piping and bathroom replacement, and then the air conditioning for the auditorium at Ramona. As far as the rejections, the three alternates that we're recommending to reject at this point, you know, the extra bit of roofing work, now we feel like given kind of the whole picture, the best decision is just to wait and then replace that, you know, down the road when we replace some other sections of roof at Ramona. And then the two options for the generator backup here at the MEC, it's not that we don't think that that's a very worthwhile. It's just that given everything and the value attached with it, we're continuing to investigate other options and what that might look like. So for now, the recommendation is to pass on those two items, but I would expect us the administration to come back with something in the future, you know, as far as an idea to try and get that back up here at the MEC, which we think would be really valuable to the district. So that's kind of my thoughts on everything. And if anyone has any more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Corey, I did have one that we haven't talked about for a while, but normally we have like 2 schools that we're doing construction on so that we can space out the summer academics, et cetera, et cetera. This is a notable difference from that with all 4 schools. So how disruptive is that, and how is that being mitigated?
It definitely limits the space available in the summertime. In this summer in particular, we have a little bit shorter summer than we typically do, if calendars align as we think they might. So it will make space more challenging. We've taken a look though, and we think between Mackenzie and WJHS that we have enough space. Corey and Kristen have been looking really closely at what space is needed for summer school and for summer park district programming. Corey?
Yeah, so you are right. This will be different than what we've done before. However, when you dig into what we've used in the past, what's available at Mackenzie and the junior high, those would be the only 2 buildings that would house any kind of programming between D39 and the Park District. The Park District would have at one building the same amount of space that they've had in the past. And at another building, it might be a few classrooms less, like maybe 2 or 3 or 4. But, you know, from what we've seen, like their programming tends to be outside barring, you know, a thunderstorm. So, and then as far as, you know, work being done in this building, we've talked about as administrative team about how we can accommodate the staff here throughout the summer and kind of plan around that. So yeah, will it be different and will it be a lot of work? Yes, but we have the ability to do this. So.
And I would add, I think it's just tremendous. This has been a ton of work and something this district has talked about for a really, really long time. To think that 100% air conditioning in classroom spaces is potential within the next year is incredible. with the exception of a few at WJHS, which we have a plan for in the near future as well. I think that leaps and bounds progress that is being made here and able to be accomplished within the budgeted amount that we were looking at. So I want to commend our team who's been working really hard at this, our business office who's been supporting all of that effort. It certainly will be a summer of rigorous work, but I think it brings everyone into what we're looking for in terms of our learning environment. And so kudos to everyone for making that a possibility pending board approval.
So I want to second that. I'm so excited. I mean, the chart, like, I don't think we ever imagined banging this out so quickly. And so that's fabulous. So thank you all. It's huge. If you've sat in these classrooms, it's a really big deal. Corey, I just had a question to you about the remaining 25%. Are they like located in a certain spot? Is there anything we can do for that?
So I think if we looked at a map, nearly all of those remaining classrooms at the junior high, they're first floor classrooms that primarily touch the two courtyards. There's a couple when you're looking at the junior high, just to the left of the auditorium, I believe those two classrooms as well don't have it. But the bulk of those 10 are in that middle section with the courtyards.
And there's air-conditioned spaces above them, I
Yes.
think, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Yeah.
But they're un-air conditioned, and the staff who work in those spaces have continued to remind us that they should remain on the list and certainly are need attention when that opportunity arises. And so thankfully to have that opportunity arise in the next 2 years is huge. It really is. It really is. So in the meantime, yes, we can look at some alternatives to try to reduce the heat even further.
Anybody have any more questions? So thank you very much for a lot of work that went into this, and the results from the bids look like it was appreciated by the community also. As I said, they came in fairly tight and within expectations. So that's a reflection on we haven't done good work. So thank you very much. And, have a good holiday.
Good.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. Sort of incredible. Okay. I will, on a related note, turn it over to Mr. Cesaretti so we can talk about finance.
Right, we're gonna talk about how to pay for it.
Yes.
So, and I'll probably turn it over to Corey,
Yeah.
I think, very soon.
Absolutely.
So, we're gonna talk about long-term debt, and thank you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Our 5-year financial projections and the property tax refund recapture amount for 2022.
Just give me one second.
Our construction team is leaving and Corey is getting queued up. There are donuts in the far corner here if anyone wanted to, and coffee in the other corner.
So this is so big.
It really is, it's huge.
It's
It's
so
huge that the
The
opportunity
chart,
exists.
the
so,
100%.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. And the board might remember just a year ago or so, we were talking about how to spread it out, and maybe by 2028, we could accomplish district-wide, and now we're really, there's a viable option. And I think there's some cost savings included as well, because we're doing it now, and we're doing them all together. So I think there's some good opportunities, and I think our staff are going to be thrilled.
And the kids
And the
too.
kids.
And the
yeah.
kids as well.
Yeah,
And the
it's
kids
just
as well.
everybody's learning and working.
Maybe we can do more over the summer.
Throw it all in.
It's just, you mean
You're
that's-
thinking
that's
down
just
the road
25%?
in
Way
this
down.
use of,
I mean,
use of
the
our space
spaces.
and learning
Oh,
opportunities in the
more like-
summer.
Okay, I thought you meant.
We
like-
cannot do any more
John.
construction this summer. No, this
John, you're
is-
right.
This is the end of that, but I think there are benefits beyond really the school district too, because the park district will have some access to air-conditioned space, should they need it or want it.
All right, so the next item was, we were planning to do the bond presentation, but I don't see Liz here yet. So we'll swap those and do the 5-year forecast, and hopefully by the time we're done talking about that.
Where did you speak up a few
Yeah.
more? Okay.
Hopefully by the time she gets here, then we'll be ready to do the bond presentation. All right, so the 5-year projection. So annually, we target December as a good time to update and go through this long process. Add in the new budget amounts, add in the new recently completed fiscal year. So I want to walk the board through this and a couple of options. So the first thing on here is the list of assumptions. I'm not going to read all of them, but I want to just highlight a few assumptions that are really, pretty pertinent to when we get to the summary page. So on the revenue side, property taxes are our big driver. And so the assumptions that we put in associated with that are pretty key. So we were able to pull some CPI estimates from Bloomberg. We know that for levy year 2022, that's a 5%. We're now seeing CPI above 5% again for calendar year 22, which would be next fall's levy request, that's 5%. And then the next few years after that, the Bloomberg had 4.2 and 2.5 and 2%. So when we kind of look at that in a historical context, you're seeing, this 5-year period is a good bit of inflation higher than what we would have typically seen over a 5-year period. Then we drop down in property taxes. What are we looking at for new growth? Our 10-year average is that 14.2. I think one thing it's nice to highlight is we don't know what that is until the final extension is calculated. And so it's nice to have a reference point here of, okay, our low point, which was 6.9 million several years ago, that generated only would have generated a value of about 188,000. But if we'd hit that high mark of almost 25 million in growth, we would be looking at 678,000 as a value attached to that. Then another consideration is collection rate. That, like, what are we budgeting? What are we forecasting? What have we typically seen in our history? 98.6 net collection rate. So that's, revenue collected minus any refunds processed at the Cook County level. 98.6% is what our historical rate is. And then for reference, okay, well, what happens if we see a change in that? A 0.5 percentage point in collection rate is worth about 290,000. So if it were to drop down to 98.1, okay, we're down 290,000. If we were to jump up to 99.1, then we get an extra 290,000. Then other revenue items included in here, interest, we go through and look at what do we anticipate interest rates might be, and then based upon fund balance, and include that in there. At least in this iteration of our 5-year projections, with interest rates having shot up so much recently, that does have a positive impact on the overall projections. And then for local revenue items, we've held those steady based upon current parameters approved by the board. Another big item is the Keep 39 amounts. And so for fiscal year 24, I set that to the similar amount that we have for the budget in fiscal year 23. And then we are seeing slight increases going forward. State funding essentially keeping it flat going out. And then for the categorical, same thing. Replacement taxes, while we did see for fiscal year 22 a very large increase, and then the state was projecting for fiscal year 23 that to be pretty level again. We're just gonna keep that level pending, further changes in the economic situation. Then on the expenditure side, for the entire forecast, the certified salaries are, we've put in placeholders, but they're to be negotiated as the WA contract runs out at the end of this school year. And then to properly forecast, we've included savings from known retirements, people that are in the pipeline. I think when I've looked at the history, we typically see a few people retire each year. Fiscal year 24 sees a dozen, so clearly a big spike, a little bit of an anomaly. We've incorporated the new SSU contract into the projections. A couple of years on the back end that are just placeholders. Same thing for exempted administrative staff. We've put in the applicable CPI amounts. For health insurance, we've continued to put in a projected increase of 5% per year. Just for reference point, a 1% change in increase is worth probably $55,000 to $60,000 a year. So if that were to jump up to say 6%, okay, throw on another $60,000. It's a little bit of a good reference point. IMRF fund, we calculate that based upon support staff salaries. The one thing to keep in mind with the IMRF fund, that rate is actuarially calculated every year, and it can go up or down. The last few years, we have been the recipients of some really positive news, and the rate that we're seeing in calendar year 2023 will probably be about the lowest we've ever had. So that's a positive. Then on the purchase service and supplies category, in the tort fund, the insurance expense that we have for liability insurance, various types of liability insurance, including cyber insurance policy, we've projected that in the first few years to be like 7.5, and then in the back years 5. I did see some preliminary renewals information that the last couple of years when I've listened to those meetings, our increases were up like 10, maybe a little higher. We were looking at like 5.5%, and I think a little under 5 for the cyber component. So that tends to be good news. And then the other component in there is the workers' comp policy. All other purchase services, we've put a range in of 2% to 5% increases. Same thing on supplies, where it's 2 to 4. I've kind of structured that in that the first few years of the projections have the higher percentage increases tending to mirror inflation, and on the back end it kind of drops down closer to 2. And then for special ed tuition costs, for this current school year, we saw from a budgetary standpoint a pretty big spike in this line item. We had a couple of students that were placed out of some pretty costly facilities. We're anticipating that line item will drop down, some come back for next fiscal year, and then going out, I've put in there as it's steady, kind of a steady amount. One thing to keep in mind is, regardless of whether we had kept that steady or increased it by a few percent, this line item is going to fluctuate based upon our student needs in a given year, and really the fluctuations, can go one way or another pretty significantly. So then the next projection assumption I just kind of want to share with everybody relates to, since it's a big one, is what projects do we have in there? The bulk of our funding for doing summer capital projects, it comes from 2 sources. It's when we are able to issue some debt certificates or some bonds, get some proceeds, or we're transferring money from the operations and maintenance fund over to the capital projects fund. So this document looks at, incorporates the projects that we had talked about last spring. What are we looking to accomplish in the next 5 to 7 years? The green ones are in fiscal year 23, paying for the last parts of Harper Boiler, Ramona Windows, and Mackenzie Air Conditioning. Then the yellow, those are the actual amounts in total of the bid results, split over the 2 fiscal years for the 5 projects that we're recommending for approval. And then when you look at the out years on this document, once we were to get past this large summer of air conditioning projects, then in summer of 24, we'd be looking at going to junior high, doing a partial roof replacement. It's about half of the roof or maybe a little over. The following summer in 25, going back and air conditioning those remaining classrooms. Then in the summer of 26, replacing the windows in not the entire building, but most of the building. And then the last year of this projection would be like the summer of 27. It's a long way out, but something that has kind of caught our attention is in some of the buildings, I think it would be worthy of doing some bathroom renovations. So we've got a little bit of a placeholder that would probably be split across multiple buildings. So that's a pretty big assumption that the dollar amounts are large and that they impact it. So move to the next slide. The next slide this is our base, kind of our base scenario. This is the operating funds. The first column is our fiscal year 23 budget, the board approved. So you see us projected to end with about a 42.7% fund balance. And then going out, you see each year pretty steady, staying above 40%. And the nice thing is that this scenario incorporates all the projects that I just talked about. It does include a borrowing option that we'll talk about still this morning. And then let's go to the next page. Here's our fund balance graph that shows our base scenario with everything staying above 40% going out. Those last 6 years are the kind of projected years. We finished fiscal year 22 at 51.7. So you see that kind of planned spending down of fund balance from our high point of around 70%. The spending of down is planned. It's on capital projects that provide long-term value to the district. This next page shows, I think, a really nice trend. It's always good to look back a handful of years, look forward. Revenues versus expenditures in the operating funds. So we're looking back at 5 years of actual data. What are we budgeting for fiscal year 23? Always great to see revenues exceeding expenditures. We see that same scenario playing out heading forward 5 years. I think one of the reasons that you go through the projections when you look at slides like this is, particularly as you look at those out years, if you were to see a trend that you didn't like, or something that where those green bars were to be higher, it provides the district enough lead time to course correct and make changes and plan so that we don't actually spend more than what we're bringing in. So this next scenario is a little bit different. It'll make a little more sense when we get through the bond presentation. So it's kind of an alternate to our base scenario. And so the difference between the previous summary that I showed you and this one is that this includes a bonding option that has a 10-year payback versus a 12-year payback. It just means that right away up front, you're getting a little over $2 million less. And what you can see is that fiscal year 23 doesn't look to be impacted. But as you hit 24 and beyond, it does drag our projected fund balance down to, we're basically right at like our target amount, just below 39 or just above 40. And depending upon how things shake out, it would take away some of that flexibility that I think is important. And it, the way you would combat that is, some of the projects that you have lined up in the future in 24, 25, 26. Depending on how things played out, you'd potentially looking at delaying something if this were to play out unfavorably. Then here's a fund balance graph for that scenario as well, just showing that those 5 projected years are basically right at our or 40% threshold. And I'll just cover, there's many more pages in this document, but I'll just go after a couple more before I open up to questions. This is the operating funds revenue analysis. So you see a little more detailed in that summary, breaks the local down a little more, breaks down the state a little more. I think it's a good projection. I think the graph on the bottom left, and I think what it shows is, District 39 is very much reliant on our community. Well over 90% of our funding is property taxes and other sources of local revenue. We do get some state and federal funding, but what happens within our borders is what drives the district. And then on the expenditure side for the operating funds, you see the breakout. Not a surprise. Salary and benefits combined, you're looking at about 80% of the district's total expenditures, and you see a nice linear increase, primarily, just the result of inflation on the goods and services, but then also the increases that cost to employ people, both on the salary and benefits. Like I said, the rest of the document, there's many more pages. There's a summary, and it is some expenditure information on each of the funds. Feel free to look through that. I don't want to go through each one in detail. Take a ton of time, but at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has about projections and where we're at, where we think we're headed, and how everything kind of fits together.
Thanks, Corey. That was incredibly comprehensive. Any comments on that or questions? Go, Frank. Oops, sorry.
Yep. Again, that very comprehensive. It covered a lot of the topics that we've been talking about. So we have a good baseline. So thank you for that. I had a small question, I guess.
Sure.
What's the assumed interest rate on our reserves? I mean, how much? I know. I mean, in the past, it's been so close to zero that we basically didn't think about it at all. And now the numbers have gone up a little bit. What numbers are you using for projections?
We've been getting like 3%. And so one of the things that I did is like looking at the interest was, for like next year, I have a much higher level of confidence in a couple of things. One, that from the feedback we're getting, that like Cook County's delay from this year will not happen again, which is good because that's a lot of money for us, lost interest revenue that we could have started to receive that installment in late July and into August versus, hey, we're going to get some in like the last half of December. So that's like one thing that's going to help. But then, so it's like looking at about 3%. But then going back out, one of the things that I've typically done for an item like interest revenue is seeing how things have gone in the last, say, 15 years. It's probably not likely that interest rates will stay that high. Like at some point, they'll start to pull them back. And so what I've typically done when I've done forecasts, not just here, but other places, is you have a good idea for interest revenue for a year, maybe two, start to pull that back. So whatever total amount I had for fiscal year 24, I started to like tear that down in the out years, knowing that the likely scenario is that we're going to see reduced interest rates, not planning that interest rates are going to stay at 3 for the next 5 years when they've basically been at 0 for, since like 08 or 09. So that's kind of what I had put in there. So it started with 3 and then just tiered it back.
It's historically the spread between our rate return on our reserve money and our historical loan rate, about 2.5%, 3%, maybe, difference.
Say that again?
Let's just pick a number. 2 years ago, before inflation started picking up, we were in the 0.5% rate of return, and our loan rate was in the 2.5% return rate. I mean, that delta of the 2.5%, is that kind of a historical number that long term?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, going back, I mean, there's in the last few years, some of the budgets for interest rates, revenue would have been like 0.75%, 0.5%. And at the worst points, it's like, okay, I'm going to budget 0.05% or 0.1%, right? Like a lot of money times that is still just not very, it's not a lot. So yeah, it can grow substantially if you can get up to that 2.5%, 3%. I think not too long before I came here, I think rates got up close to 2. Then COVID hit, things went racing down. So I think something in like closer to 2, like long term, 1.5, 2 is probably.
Our historic interest rate on debt is in the 2.5%, 3% range. Or?
Yeah. I mean, typically what I've seen is it's a little tricky. When you issue it, I would say yes, like that's been the cost. The coupon amount tends to be like somewhere between 3 and 5 because that's what the market wants. And so the coupon will end up being higher than what the market rate is. So then what I've, at least in the last 15 years, what I've typically seen is that you end up getting a big premium on the proceeds up front. It's, an issuance thing, but yeah, so something like, I think that's a good spread. I think right now that spread is a lot closer. If you were to look at what's in the presentation that Liz put together versus what we're able to get, that spread is much closer right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of self-funding versus debt funding. What that delta is the number that I was trying to get to.
Anne, did you have a question?
Yes, quick question regarding KEEP. So we have built in the revenue through fiscal year 28 for KEEP, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I was just curious if we should look at, I know that we're planning to have a conversation about that in the coming months. And if we should just be cognizant of what the impact of, if we made changes, knowing that it's on the table to discuss, what the impact would be, maybe one more scenario here.
Yeah, so one of the things that is kind of in the pipeline, at least from my perspective, to work on, that's been pushed off a little bit because of all the construction stuff we've been working on for the last several months. But I'm anticipating maybe like around February, being able to come back to the board, certainly in that January to March timeframe, and saying, okay, we know what the parameters were of like starting up the KEEP program. What were the costs that were KEEP specific construction wise? Then creating some KEEP 39 specific financial statements. This is what the revenue was. This is what the costs were by implementing this program on an annual basis, not the construction, finding out what that gap is, right? There should be a gap, like a difference, and then seeing how long it's going to pay back that construction. And that'll be like one starting point. And then obviously, like anything, the board can certainly provide us direction to make a decision, like, are we going to wait until we pay it back? However the board wants to go about that conversation, but at least it would be a starting point for everyone to see where we're at relative to what had been discussed on the front end. And I think we go from there. But it is something that is it's on my mind, not like immediate, but
Right.
we know it's a point of conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. I was inquire similarly. Great. So February, that will be good. Anyone else? So Corey, I think, I want to make sure I understood. There was a piece of the presentation talking about this sort of works with the long-term debt presentation. So if you could remind us the kind of the original plan, right, that I guess is incorporated in the first part versus this 10-year plan, and kind of why we explored that.
All right.
Would be helpful.
Yeah, so the difference is like there's, we'll share in the bond presentation is a 10 versus a 12-year payback. I think it'll make more sense as we dig into those details. And then I can also, when we're going through that, I can also reference, I guess, what I would be my preferred like bonding scenario versus what is what we had back in May or June. I think it was in June, is a likely scenario. I think it's much improved. So I think that will answer some questions. So is there any more questions about the 5-year projections?
No.
Okay.
Do the property tax refunds?
Oh, sure, we can do that one. So, yeah, annually, the Cook County is required to look at the period of November 1st through October 31st, calculate the refunds that are allowed to be recaptured by a school district. For the first year, that was just under $520,000. That was on the 2021 tax year, which is got incorporated into the second installment tax bills that people would have, they just were processed or put out publicly at the end of November, in the last half of November. Well, this past week on Thursday or Friday, Cook County released the amount that's applicable to the 2022 tax year, which will be paid by everyone next calendar year. That amount, the refund recapture amount is $435,000. That's applicable to District 39. So as we talked about, like last year around this time, the way it's currently structured, that amount, $435,000, would get added to the final tax extension next year, barring some sort of board action. Kind of the default is the county calculates it, they add it to our tax extension. If the board decided to do otherwise, they would be required to take action by, I think, either end of February or March of 2023 for next fall. So I think it's in line. I think the first couple of years of finding these amounts out, you're still kind of feeling out and seeing what kind of trends are there. So kind of incorporated in our planning, we have those amounts incorporated in there. And to be a little conservative, looked at future years at around 400,000. But at least that's kind of the process. If anybody has any questions about that amount.
I asked this question before, which was, have any governing units in Wilmette not done this? Have they gone and?
I don't know about governing units, but the general consensus that I've seen on the school district side was that people were doing that, primarily because it was an extra source of revenue to either help fund some projects that districts had, or districts felt, at least what I'd seen on communications between business officials, was it was extra money available to help on the academic side to help students come back through, rebound from COVID. So I think there are probably some examples of school districts that have abated that or passed on that, but not from what I've seen.
Thank you.
And just one other thing, when I was looking at the big spreadsheet that the Cook County put out, I don't believe that recapture amount is applicable to every village or municipality. I don't know the reason, because it's not our area, but I wonder if it's related to home rule versus non-home rule scenario, but all right, so the next thing that was supposed to be on the docket is the presentation by Liz on our bond. Talked to her on Friday, but let me just take a quick second to see if she's here. And if not, we need to juggle something, or I can walk everyone through it myself.
Is she not here yet?
I don't see her.
I think we might be able to take a pause then on this item and transition to our strategy and then circle back so that we can give her the opportunity, and maybe in the interim, Corey, you can just reach out and make sure that she is in fact still on her way, that an emergency didn't come up for her. We do have a couple of items under strategy that need to be discussed as well.
About a half hour ago, I did send her a Zoom link just in case there was miscommunication. So if that maybe works better for her, she has that option as well.
Yeah, let me,
Does that
That's
sound
perfect.
okay?
So
Just
let's,
to try and
yes.
maximize our use of time and.
So I'll turn it to Ms. Schneider-Faves for strategy.
Good morning and happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm delighted to make another turn. Communications plan. Should we start with that?
Sure, that would be great.
I love that we have one.
Yes, well, as the board recalls, as part of our action steps for this year, our communication plan was one of those action steps, and we're pleased to be able to present our communication plan to you today. We have Leo Kraus here, and I think Tony will be supporting him as well, but Leo will be primarily talking us through the communication plan, some data that's been gathered to inform our steps and everything that's included. So, Leo.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Thank you for giving me just a few minutes of your time this morning to go over an important part, kind of a supporting part of our strategic plan. So I will share this and just bring it up here. All right. So the first part of the plan is essentially just kind of an introduction and a reiteration of our D39 mission. Everything that we put out externally and even internally is in alignment with our mission. It's something that's always at the forefront of all of our communication. A quick reminder that this is a working document and provides a framework for our strategic communications and a blueprint for accomplishing our goals. This will be changed and updated as the landscape changes. So, this document gives us a good starting point for where we're at right now. This is something that will adjust in the spring and then again by next fall. So, but the nuts and bolts of this plan will stay consistent. Just touching a bit on our communications goals. You can see them here before you. The one thing that I really want to stress is an emphasis on clear and concise communication. We use different methods to connect with different groups, and I think it's always good for me and for Dr. Cremascoli or whomever the voice is of our communications to communicate clearly and concisely. Messages can be lost in translation. There are many different ways that people ingest communication. So I think if we can accomplish our goals quickly and within the attention span of our different stakeholder groups, I think it's important to just get our message out there and be concise and own the message that we're trying to send. Then we scroll down just a little bit. Some of the stuff at the beginning is largely procedural, so I'm not going to get too in-depth with it, but you can see our target audiences. The breakdown between internal and external is important. A lot of our communication is either centered internally only or externally only, so breaking down the stakeholder groups that way, excuse me, gives us kind of a good idea of what audience we're trying to reach with specific communication. Then we get into desired outcomes. I think people think communication is all about keeping people informed or in the loop, and that's true, but it's only just a part of it. I think when we want to communicate and talk about communicating strategically, I think the biggest thing that comes of it is either building community, and I think effective strategic communication can build a wonderful internal community and reinforce the culture that Dr. Cremascoli wants to create and the example that she sets. And I think effective strategic communication certainly reinforces that within our internal groups. And then externally, sure, keeping community members informed is important, but what is our goal with that? It's to create a sense of pride, make Wilmette residents feel proud of the education that their students are getting, and make our families feel, A, that they're a part of this educational journey, and B, also be able to be proud and kind of puff their chests out and showcase Wilmette District 39 and speak glowingly of the education that their kids are getting and feel like they're a part of it. Inclusion is important all the way across the board, but I think when you talk about our families, having them be on the educational journey with their kids is certainly part of our strategic communication. Then you look a little bit at our communication channels. Again, just largely a list: email, district school websites, newsletters, press releases, different ways that and different avenues that we use to get these messages out. Different stakeholders and different messages get communicated differently. And we have a wide array of tools to communicate these messages. Scrolling down just a little bit to page 4, functions of District 39 communications. And again, myself, even though I'm kind of a one-man band, I'm really not. I have the support of our administration as well as our building administrators, and it's certainly a community effort to communicate effectively. These are just a couple of the main functions of our communications department / community. Community and media relations certainly speak for themselves. That's kind of the external part of my job. And a lot of that is relationship building and not necessarily controlling the narrative, but giving our District 39 presentation and information that needs to go out to the public. I'm going to come back to centralized communication, but research and planning. I love data. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a data guy. And I think using surveys and other ways to capture people's opinions and thoughts is extremely valuable as we put together a communications plan going forward. We need to know what people are thinking now and in the future to determine how we communicate with them. We'll get into this in a few minutes, but with social media constantly changing and different generations of people becoming parents and how they ingest their own information, we need to make sure that we're on top of it to make sure that we're effectively communicating with all of our groups. I put crisis communication in here. It's certainly an important part of our communication, but one that we hopefully don't have to use too frequently. But the point I wanted to make with that is we do have plans in place for crisis communication. We have procedures, we have protocols, and it's something that we take very seriously. We review annually and update as needed. So when it comes to crisis communication, we are prepared in the event that we need it. But I want to just circle back to centralized communication real quick. This is a part of my job that I take very seriously, is just kind of being a hub for everything that goes out, especially at the district and school level. I feel like classroom level is a little bit different. Communication between teachers and families might be a little bit more personal and one-to-one. But I love being kind of either a moderator or someone who kind of sets the stage for things that go out at district and school level. It allows us to coordinate our messaging, be consistent with it. I think the one thing that's pretty universal is if families are getting mixed messages, they're going to be vocal about it, and it's going to affect their experience. So I think making sure that we're on the same page and we message appropriately is extremely important and part of my job that I take very seriously. So I think that's certainly a huge part of what I do and what I bring to the table for D39. So kind of being that hub, being that centralized spot in person makes for effective communication. Scrolling down to, there are a couple of kind of blueprints that will give you a little insight into kind of how we communicate, frequency of some communication, and kind of the template that we use for each. I don't feel like I need to go too in depth with that, but it kind of gives an outline of some of the things that we will communicate consistently and how we do it, and kind of what our goals are with that. And then scrolling down a little bit further, we get to some of the survey data. And we were able to survey D39 families and, faculty and staff differently, just on communication preferences, kind of how they think we're doing. Internally, we have a lot of discussions on how we think we're doing, but internal discussions are one thing. What the outside perception of us and how we communicate can be totally different. So we received over 600 responses from families, which I think we were pretty happy with. It's a good segment of our community. And they were broken down neatly by school. So we felt like we were working from a pretty good foundation for this data. And as you can see, overwhelmingly, the email was the preferred vehicle of communication, which is great because in our internal discussions, that was what we thought. It was kind of a reinforcement of what we had believed. Social media, I think with 8.2, I think it's great, but I don't think parents want news that way. I think they want that for different things. But I think when it comes to receiving specific email at the district and school levels, that email is the best way to reach our parents. And then the second question, which we thought was interesting, was social media platforms that are used. And I think we all knew that Facebook was probably going to be number one. Instagram is number two and rising. And to see Twitter at 14% was interesting and kind of noteworthy. I feel like, in communications, those had always been the big three. But it was interesting to see that our families may not use Twitter as much as we might have thought. So how will that direct our thinking? Not 100% sure, but it does show that we can focus on Facebook and Instagram and be effective with what we use social for. And then that third question is always one of the biggest ones for me, about the amount of communication. There's a lot of things that come across my desk, and kind of working with my team, my administrative team, to manage what goes out, how it goes out, make sure the parents aren't inundated. I think that's always my biggest fear. If you send out too much and you inundate them, it's going to get lost. They're going to start to disregard it. But to see that 85% thought we communicated at an appropriate level was great, and something that I hope to either maintain or improve on as we go forward. So the results from the family survey were largely promising and encouraging, and kind of lets us know that we're on the right track and kind of hitting the right notes with our communications. Then we scroll down to the staff survey, and how often do you communicate with families? 43% monthly or longer, which was kind of interesting. And I think we don't have great insight into parental or staff family communication. And I think that's okay. But getting this kind of data is certainly knowledgeable as we formulate our communication around and trying to support and supplement the classroom communication. And then lastly, I think I kind of looked at all this data, and as I organized all of our communications thoughts into a communications plan, it's kind of like, all right, so now what? What are our actionable items? What are our action steps? And working with Tony and the tech team to look into refreshing our district and school websites is going to be something that's on the docket coming up. I think that would be a great way to continue to streamline information, maybe even make our websites a little bit more of a destination for our families. Continuing to grow our social platforms. I feel like as social media continues to grow amongst our groups, especially our kind of like 30-something parents who have used social from high school and college on, making sure that we are a presence there, giving them points of pride through social media. And then just reviewing our communications tools, making sure they give us what we need, looking into platforms that give us metrics that can help us learn internally whether we're hitting our correct groups, kind of using metrics as a supplement to survey data. And then continuing to be out there in community events. And Dr. Cremascoli and I have talked about having presence at the Wilmette Centennial or Bicentennial celebration, their 150th anniversary, and just making sure that D39 is active within the community. It's a great way to build our larger community and to show kind of all of the great things that are going on in here. And as Corey mentioned earlier with the financials, a lot of this happens within our borders, and it's word of mouth. It's being happy with your kids' experience. And for us to be able to participate in these community events, I think is an area where we can continue to grow and do wonderful things to showcase our kids and our faculty and our staff. And then I think the last couple ones are just continuing to survey our families and staff and kind of taking their temperature, seeing where they're at with communication, and making sure that we are meeting their needs while also meeting our needs from a district and school level. So this was a great exercise for me to put all this together, map it out, and give me kind of a working document to go forward with. I think people, when I meet faculty and staff, they're like, oh yeah, you're the guy who sends me all the emails. And yes, I am, but there is more to communications than that. It's a very strategic position, one that I take seriously within the district, and one that I think we are in a good place at now as we progress through the rest of our strategic plan. Tony, is there anything that I missed that you would like to add?
No, you covered everything.
If anybody has any questions or concerns, I'd be happy to address.
Yeah, I think.
No.
Go ahead. Thank you, Leah. That was excellent. And I'm personally grateful for your presence at meetings where I'm at, and I'm partially articulate. And you go ahead and clean it up and finish it. Thank you very much. No, I mean, this is a great report. Very happy to have you speaking for everyone on the board, and do greatly appreciate your efforts. I think you're doing a really nice job.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. Thank you so much for this report. I can see how much work went into it, and I mean, it's something that I've been personally interested in, and so it was really great to get all of this data and to see what things you are focusing on. I just had a quick question. I mean, everything looks so great. In terms of our website, is there a way to track how many hits you get on a particular page? And I'm thinking about the pages that have those little wheels of like where we are in terms of our our goals for the strategic plan. in particular areas. Can you tell how many people are looking at that?
Tony, you can,
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah, when we associated Google Analytics to our website previously, when we redesigned it the first time, just to see what pages were visited most often or not, but it's not always accurate either. Sometimes links bring you into certain pages just because of keywords. Sometimes there's bots that kind of bring people to certain places. But yeah, if you're talking in general terms, there's, at least through Google Analytics, have some type of indication of what pages are used more than others. The websites themselves are a big topic of discussion because there are those, and Leo, feel free to jump in, but there are those people that want a leaner, slimmer, fewer clicks website with just the information you need. However, the information you need is very personal. So what I may need is not something you may need, and therefore over time we've gotten, at least in District 39, to a point where everything is on the website. If you want it, it is there, which can be good as far as transparency is concerned. So it depends on what angle you're looking at. As far as transparency is concerned, we're one of the few places that truly has everything out there. But in doing that, for the majority of people, are they able to find things in as few clicks as possible? So there's a great philosophical debate out there as far as what should get top billing, what should be on the headings, what should be listed under the headings. And it ends up being a very personal thing. So when we go to redesign this site, we're gonna inevitably, there's gonna be people that will disagree. So we'll have to see what people seem to access more than not. And then I know there's been a request by at least one person here on the board to not get rid of everything, but archive it in a way that it's still there, but maybe just isn't as out there. So not to give up on the transparency of what we do have. It will be a long process. We will still have a mobile-friendly site. I'm not convinced we need an app like some districts go to, those that have put it out there. Usage, except for notifications, it really just displays whatever's on the website. So if you have a really good mobile-friendly site, that usually gets our constituents what they need. Leo, is there anything to add?
I was just going to say, Bonnie, if you were talking about the KPI dashboard in particular, I haven't had a chance to really do any digging into the metrics quite yet, but I would be happy to do so if you would like.
Oh, I mean, actually, it was more, I mean, you don't need to do it for me, but I was more like, I think that stuff like that's new to the site. I don't know how many people know about it, but I would hope that people are looking at that.
Oh, yeah.
Such a great.
But I think you're right. It is a good reminder for me to, hey, we have put this out there new. Are we being effective with how we're communicating it? Because we do want it to be a resource for all of our community members. So I will put that on my list just as a form of practice to make sure that we're effectively putting it out there, because it's a key part of things.
If I can add, in relation to what Bonnie's asking as well, knowing that our parents primarily want to consume their news via email, one thing that Leo and I have talked about is enhancing our tools for our people to email. So having content embedded in the body of the email as opposed to clicking away. Some professional newsletter tools, of which you can embed in emails, do provide analytics, whereas currently we don't have that. So some of our principals are using a tool called S'more. Well, if you go to the newsletter, it's just, that's the name of the tool. It's an online newsletter tool. But the beauty of that is, depending on where they click, there are, at least for the user, it shows how many clicks to get to that article. So, do we go down the road of like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact or something like that for either building or district communications just to enhance the body piece? And the downside, of course, is none of these professional tools integrate with a student information system. They were never designed for schools, so they're not going to fit as well with PowerSchool. And some of those tools that fit well with PowerSchool are not as built out as some of the professional ones. So we may get to a point where we have multiple tools depending on who's using it. There's our website service is coming out with a new email / newsletter communication tool in January. So we're excited to learn a little bit more about that. We have heard through the rep that there's some analytics built into that.
Thank you.
Others?
I wanted to just kind of reiterate, this is a very professional presentation. Lots of detail presented with skill. So I think it's a great step forward, what you've been able to do for that. I had one tweak, I guess. Sometimes using a word or a set of words helps us focus a little bit. And in the external groupings, you have resident. And I think there's a little bit of missing emphasis here on taxpayers. And I know there's a slight difference between resident and taxpayers, so I wouldn't necessarily say replace resident, but maybe resident / taxpayers. And the reason I say that is we have really good financials. But there's 10, 20%, whatever the number is, but not zero, of the community that the only interaction with the school is because they pay for it. You know, their tax bill, you know, when tax levies come up, if there's ever, knock on wood, not in foreseeable future, a need for a referendum, when there's something that comes up, that group goes from totally in the background to very focused. And having a history of at least some contact as a taxpayer saying, you know, here's how good we're spending your money. And, you know, they see that year after year. And then if something comes up, there's at least a history that it's been good. You know, now there's a reason why it popped up, but not to like kind of, not quite ignore them, but have them almost be invisible. Maybe that's a better word, until there's a problem. So I think a little bit more emphasis on finding that group or getting financial information out to the broader audience, which that group then would find. And you have a lot of stuff in here, but sometimes the very fact of mentioning it makes a difference, and it's not mentioned in here. And I think it's almost like an insurance policy. If we do a little bit, because we do have really good numbers, then if something comes up, we've already established a flow and a history and this doesn't quite hit that.
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, I'm grateful that the board was able to get their eyes on this and provide some feedback, and very valuable for me to hear from all different perspectives. So I appreciate that. That's something that we'll certainly evaluate.
Yeah, overall, this is great, though. I mean, I think this is really, really good. Well done.
Thank you.
Can I just say to this point that I'm going to gently disagree with you? Just because I don't think I like Wilmette residents, and I don't know, I'm assuming that you made that decision thoughtfully. And, you know, reminding people that, you know, we're focused on a relationship based on, you know, the taxpayer, you know, that, you know, the money aspect of it. I don't think it's necessary.
Others?
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
We have a communications meeting.
It is, it's great to have it written down, and if anyone has any other feedback in the days to come, feel free to just drop me an email. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Do we go to population and enrollment report, or do
Yeah,
we?
it's
Let's
quick.
finish out strategy before circling back, if that works for everyone.
It works?
Is that, Corey, sorry,
that's fine.
does that work?
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
Yep. So is it okay if I start?
please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when we talked about our long-term projections, I guess it's been a month now ago, our yearly report, of course, we use Berger, as we have for, I think, at least 15 years now, and do a yearly look at our projections. We also mentioned that we, in conjunction with our New Trier Township School partners, went in on a demographer forecast with McKibben Group. And that was just to, really, we didn't necessarily need the data, although it's nice to have another point of validation, whether Berriger is on or not, or who's to say who's right or not, but to see if they're at least going in the same direction. But it really was to provide a common data set for those in the township that needed it, such as New Trier or other schools, mainly for New Trier, but it did at least provide that data for all the schools. The report is in there. I'm not going to go over the report, other than the fact that what was most curious to me was just how this differed from the report that I provided you a month ago. And I just looked at the next 4 or 5 years. The McKibben report goes out 10. That's a little long for anybody to see into the future, whereas Berriger goes out 5, but they take a fresh look at it every year. But in looking at the next 4 or 5 years, there was a slight difference between the two companies. Berriger shows us increasing ever so slightly. Again, we're 3,330, I think, 8 students today. And it shows, Berriger shows like over the next 5 years, we're going to gain 77 students. Whereas McKibben's report actually showed the numbers going down. So over the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to decrease about 90 students. So one report says we're going to go up 77, the other one's going down 90. Over the next 4 or 5 years. However, when you're talking 3,338 students as of today, I would like to remind everyone that's a very, very small number. So generally, we're a very stable district. The report didn't provide any new information, I would say. They said things that we already knew. Our great migration trends tend to be the college kids going off to school and the age of over 70 that tend to move out. So we've been saying for years that our families move in for the schools in Park District and everything, and then they move out and another family moves in, hence the reason why these numbers don't change that much. So we'll find out in time, if one is right or not. It doesn't, luckily for us, change much. We're not having to put on with ranges such as this. We're not, and spread across the entire district. We're not having to add on additions or build buildings or anything of that nature. So it's probably just more interest in seeing who had a kind of a more accurate look at this than not. So the McKibben one did not go by school, just we participated for the common data set, but we did not pay for the look at each school. We just did grade level and district, whereas the Berriger one, as you know, we do look at each school. So that was a slight difference as well. But again, you have the report. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them once you've reviewed it, or if you have any questions now.
Overall, pretty stable enrollment.
Very stable enrollment. We've always been stable. I mean, really, it's everything you've heard in the past holds true and even validated in McKibben's report when looking at demographic trends for Wilmette. Yes.
Any questions, board members?
I think it's a good report. As you mentioned before, I mean, what it comes down to is really the grade schools. That's where the variance fluctuates year by year, and you have to accommodate, but you have plans for that, so.
We do, and some of these years, I mean, the report may say up 14 and down 6. Well, goodness, depending on which family moves in, that could be completely inaccurate. There could be a tear down for 3 years while a house is being built. It's inaccurate. So I believe that all of these are pretty well in the margin error. So we have a very stable population here in our district boundaries, for sure.
I think that concludes strategy.
Okay, thank you so much. Should we move back to finance?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Corey?
Thank you.
Good morning.
Oh,
Excuse me.
nope.
And good morning.
Sorry.
I apologize, did not make your meeting this morning in person. Thanks for allowing me to present here the financing options. So let me just try to share here.
Thanks, Elizabeth. While you're doing that, I'm just going to pause for a second. I heard mention of a break, so just want to make sure that people are either comfortable moving forward or if we're needing to pause for 5 minutes certainly could accommodate.
We'll take
Okay.
a break after.
Take a break after, sounds great. Thank you
Okay.
for joining us, even virtually. We're always happy to have you with us.
Well, I appreciate your flexibility this morning.
Absolutely.
Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I thought I'd start by updating you with the market. This graph shows interest rates since January of 2019. And going back to that time, looking at the 1-year MMD Municipal Market Data Index in purple, the 10-year in red, the US Treasury 10-year bond in blue, and the yellow represents the 30-year AAA municipal market data, tax exempt bonds. We see where the district priced its most recent two issues in May of 2020, right after the market reacted with the pandemic and the Fed brought rates down, very close to the all-time low, which happened in August of 2020. And then here in February of 22, we sold the most recent 5.5 million debt certificates. And since then, rates have increased dramatically given the inflation data and the Fed's attempts to counteract that with rate increases over 375. This next slide shows since January when the Fed has increased rates back in March at 25 basis points, May at 50, June 75, July 75, September 75, November 75, and then we have another rate increase occurring in December 14th, which right now looks like it'll be about 50 basis points. So we have, since the high here, kind of at the end of November, seen interest rates come down significantly. Really all told about 70 basis points or 0.7%, but that, doesn't compare with the over 3% increases we've seen since January. So looking at the district's debt, you've got the 2020 bonds, which refunded the 2010 bonds and provided $5 million of new money back in 2020. Those are at very low rates. Then you have two debt certificate bonds outstanding. Those are paid from operating funds. The most recent we did in February. And this most recent 22A, those are the coupon rates. The arbitrage yield on that was really low at 1.74%. So the coupon rates are a bit misleading. And then going back to 2012A, we still have a few maturities left on that issue. And that's an arbitrage yield of 2.08. So the debt limit is very large, given the strong and large equalized assessed value of the district, $105 million. The bonds that the district can issue without referendum include working cash, which can be used for any capital projects, life safety, which must be used only for life safety approved projects, and then funding bonds, which can be used to pay any debt obligations outstanding against the district. And the district has kept kind of the policy of paying these bonds off in 10 years or so with a window to pay future debt that's paid. I'll get into that in a minute, paid from the debt service extension base. This page just shows the separate working cash fund bond limit, which is a separate statutory limit. And that's also very generous at $51.2 million. So here's our debt service extension base. And just hopefully you can see this, but starting from the left side, we've got the EAV. Then we've got the debt service extension base, which in the 22 levy year is $1,670,528, up 5% with our CPI under the tax cap. Next year in 23, we're looking at another 5% increase. We'll know that for sure in January, but it's quite clear given the CPIs we've seen this year, on average, we're going to be over 5%. Going forward, we use resources such as the Bloomberg projection model and some of our own internal Raymond James economist projections to kind of come up with a 3% in 24 levy year and a 2%. We're just shooting an average 2% thereafter for CPI. So that's just not based on anything other than being conservative. And then we have the outstanding debt service payments in the middle of the page. The district pays about 9 cents for bonds. And then in the far column, highlighted in green, is what we call the room that you have under the debt service extension base. So this represents room to pay interest on additional bonds. And you can see it's pretty constrained in the next 2 years, but in 25, it goes up to 557,000. And then jumps up to 1.8 million in 2028, and then full amount in 29 and thereafter. So we did 2 options that we're updating from May. So the first option is if we pay back within 10 years and have a window in 2028 for the issuance of additional debt. So this window is in the year 2028 levy year. So that is the year 28. So you could issue additional debt in 28 with this particular option. The district has additional 1 million accumulated in the debt service fund that can be used to pay off some of these debt service extension-based bonds right away. And that helps lower the interest cost and increase the proceeds. But given our interest rate environment today, and given what we conservatively added is a 75 basis point rate cushion, depending on when you issue the bonds. In this scenario, we're assuming June of 23. The proceeds is $8,993,724. So just under 9 million. If we look at this graphically, we can see the green bars are the current debt service extension-based bonds from 2020, and then the blue bars represent this proposed 9 million. And then you can see room under the line, which represents debt service extension base for the issue of additional bonds. Option 2 goes out 12.5 years, so just 2 more years. Also has the window in the year 2028 for additional debt. So it's at $450,000 a year for interest, but certainly allows you to issue additional debt in the year 2028. This generates 11.1 million, which may be closer to the cost of some of your capital projects that you're looking at. Again, we're using $1 million in debt service fund additional balance, which, by the way, can only be used to pay debt service on bonds. It can't be used to pay teachers or anything else. It must be used for that purpose, paying principal and interest on bonds. So this is also assuming a 75 basis point cushion in the interest rate. And again, we're looking at a 12.5 year payback and room to issue more debt in 2028. Here's the graphic on that. So you can see it goes out just 2 years longer, but again, room to issue additional bonds at that point. So I've been talking a lot. I'll pause before we go into a draft timeline for any questions.
Thanks for pausing, Elizabeth. Any questions, you guys? Oh, Frank has a question.
It probably comes up in your next part, but I know you have the historical interest rates, and they had a little dip recently. Do you have the projection for like next year? Like, it sounds like there's going to be, at least a couple more rate increases from the feds, what that will do to the interest rates and when they may peak versus start dropping off again?
I wish I had that crystal ball, Frank. I don't. We do know the Fed's going to keep increasing interest rates through the spring. They say that they want to stabilize the short-term lending rates around 5%, and we're just kind of around 4 right now, just under 4. So, and with this 50 basis point that they're looking in December, we'll be just above 4. So I think there's going to continue to be upward pressure on interest rates. We've had this huge kind of rally in the market in this last 3 weeks, which again doesn't compare to how quickly rates have gone up, but 70 basis points down in like 3 weeks is pretty dramatic. So I kind of feel like we should move forward. The drawback about moving forward now is that if we issue bonds, and let me just go to this timeline, in the soonest we could do it would be February. We're going to have a little more interest to pay, but I think we're smart to get in the ready position to do it, given that you have gotten some good bids on your projects, and except for the processes we have to go through to authorize the bonds, we could be in the ready position as soon as February.
So is the 4.27 and the 4.39, is that reflective of a February type of a time period, or?
Well, it's just conservative. I mean, because we've seen rates go up so quickly, we have been putting 75 basis points in our cushion, which is just plain being conservative. So I think these are the highest rates you will see. I think most likely they will be lower. This is using rates as of November 30th, where rates have come down since then, plus 75 basis points of cushion. 75 basis points is what we've been seeing in these rate increases, but the Fed has stated as much, that they're not looking at that big of a jump. So I think we are super conservative. I would see this as the highest. We did a deal last week, AAA rated Champaign County, that was 15 years, that was around 350. So if that gives you an indication where rates are as of last week without the cushion in it, I hope we'll stay in that kind of neighborhood. I would expect you to be under 4%.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, I think we're good. Elizabeth, if you want to continue.
Sure. So the timeline shows, I think the board earlier today reviewed the HVAC bids. We just looked through the financing options. To move forward, we would suggest the board president call a public hearing for your January 23rd meeting on the issuance of up to maybe 11.2 million of working cash bonds. And then we would, after that public hearing, suggest the board approve a resolution of intent to issue those working cash bonds. And we would publish the notice of intent in the local newspaper, starting the 30-day petition period. And the dates work out such that the board could then be in a position to approve that resolution at the February 27th meeting. So we could either, depending on market conditions, move the sale ahead at that point, or we could delay, but in any event, close no later than June of 23, so you have the funds available for your projects.
Right. All right, thank you. Elizabeth, I think that's it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So, any questions? Any additional questions?
Two more small ones.
Oh, go ahead. Frank has some questions.
So reading these charts, the total interest delta, I'm not saying that right. The cost of the loan for the two different options, is that the CAPI plus FOH? So, I mean, is that the interest paid over the lifetime of the loan then, or?
Are you looking at the Cap I plus funds on hand line?
Yes.
No, that is, see this middle column of negatives that add up to 1,934,000? 1 million of that is the district funds on hand in the debt service fund. And then the remaining 934 is what we call capitalized interest. That's a portion of the proceeds that would be used to pay interest in these years until the debt service extension base comes back on. So if you recall, sorry, I'll flip back to this chart. You can see for 22 and 23, we've got, 58,000, 117,000. That's not enough to pay interest on the bonds until we get to 25. So we are using the funds on hand in the debt service fund, which are available to do that. Plus, we're using about 900,000 of the proceeds of bonds, which will be generated specifically for paying interest on bonds until that debt service extension base becomes available. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's what I was trying to get to, easier.
Interest cost on the bonds?
Yeah, so the interest cost on the two different options, what the delta, or what the numbers are for each of those.
Okay, so let me just do some quick math for you. Oops, don't want to have that over there. Hold on. The total debt service on the 11.1 million option is 15,285,125. And then we subtract the 1,934,449, which is reducing the interest cost. And then we subtract the proceeds, 11,147,599, and we come up with total interest cost of 2,203,000 on the option 2. And for option 1, we do the same thing. Take the 11,279,500 total debt service, subtract the 1,638,822, and subtract the proceeds, 8,993,724, to give us total interest cost on option 1, 649. I feel like that is not right, but let me just make sure I didn't make a boo-boo.
It could be.
No, I think that's right.
What was that number?
Can you repeat
Elizabeth?
that second number of total interest costs?
Yes, 646,954.
That was option 1.
That's option 1. The 8,000,009 with a 10.5-year payback.
So roughly over the life of the loans, the delta is about $1.5 million in interest.
Yes.
Okay.
That was helpful.
That was it.
And for maybe my own understanding or targeting decision-making for the board, could we talk a little bit about at what point should we make a decision regarding option 1 versus option 2? And what is the latest point by which we could make a decision of option 1 versus option 2? So like the ideal, let's have a decision made by here. And then also what is the latest date by which we could make that decision?
So if you authorize a larger amount, you can issue up to that amount, meaning we would have a public hearing for something like 11.2 million, as well as the petition period. And then, we'd certainly rerun the numbers at current rates for you. And then you would have until the board approves the sale, which could be anywhere between February 27th and June 1st when you actually decide to issue the bonds. So if we moved straight away and try to issue the bonds right after we pass the parameters resolution, I would envision that end of February, early March to make that final decision.
Okay. So in order to accomplish that, though, the board would authorize at the January 23rd meeting at the 11.2 million, and then could continue to consider what, which direction they finally want to go, and make that decision either by the end of February or as late as June 1st if we continue to kind of slow things down a little bit. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all. Any other?
Well, I might have misheard, but Corey, I think you spoke or alluded to maybe having a preference in one direction in your earlier presentation.
Yeah,
I'd
sure.
love to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts.
All right. Liz, can you go back to slide 15?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So since June, Liz and I have had multiple conversations about this and what makes sense for the district. So of the two options, I put this one in the base scenario for the 5-year projections for several reasons, and I actually really like this scenario a lot, and then especially when you compare it to what we had in June. So part of the reasons I like this funding option from like a project standpoint and where the district is financially, I like how it sets us up to handle the AC air conditioning projects right now, how it sets us up to handle stuff in the short term, which to me is the 3 projects that we know we would like to do with the junior high, and then in the long term. And so what I mean by the long term is when I look at this particular slide, the things I really like about this compared to what we had in May, you go to the green column where it says remaining DSEB capacity. The option that we presented in June had us still paying debt service in the tax year 2035. So this is 1 year shorter. Another thing was the channel or the ability to issue future bonds. Back in June when we were talking, we only were looking at the next opportunity being in tax year 2030. This presents an opportunity in 2028, which is really kind of mirrors the end of our current 5-year projection or window, kind of the end of the current 5-year or strategic planning process. We know as we wrap up that period, we'll likely start up a new planning process and new projects and things will come to the forefront. And so like those to me fit really well and set the district up really well. And just for a reference point, when you look at that green column, so what it says is tax year 2028, you have a bonding capacity of 450,000. When I talked with Liz, I'd be looking, depending upon what the rates are at time of like the bond sale, I would be looking for like board to be supportive of leaving a future channel of between 400,000 and 500,000 in tax year 28. And for reference, if you leave 400,000 available on the low end, 400,000 at 4% bonds gets you $10 million in proceeds at that point. If you go up to 500,000, that's like 12.5 million. So if you think about that in the context of like the types of projects that we might do or be thinking about, you hit that year 2028 and we will probably have things that will have come up or we will identify it at that point. Having $10 to $12 million at our disposal from a bonding capacity feels really good, like from a long term of not like putting us in a bad position. So, so I don't know. I think from my perspective, what it does to the projections, I like this setup, or I like this option better than the other one. It puts us right at, you know, that 39-40%. We've really tried to hold steadfast to that staying above that. I like this option because it provides some financial flexibility to the district and it sets us up now, short-term and long-term. That's my view anyway.
Okay, so to clarify, when you say this option, you're talking in the language of the report we were just looking at, that's option 2, right? With
Yeah, so in Liz's presentation, option 2 is built into like the base scenario that I had for the projections. The first option she presented, the shorter payback, was kind of that alternate scenario.
So option 1, maybe save some interest. But it also forces more cash flow in the short term, it sounds like.
Correct.
And then gets us closer to what we've all agreed should be our fund reserve of around 40%. Okay. Frank, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, you distracted me there for a second. So give me a second if somebody else has something. I had an idea, but.
I mean, I think mission accomplished. We understand what the differences are. So, and we have some time to think about it. So it's a really good report. Appreciate all the effort put into it. All right, I'm still going, Frank. I can keep talking. All right.
That's fine for
Are you
today.
good?
Like the timeline we've been talking about.
Okay.
You pick the dollar number that's the higher for the authorization, and then we can see what the outcomes are. And I did remember now, the interest rate that we lock in here, it's obviously for 10 to 12 years. What's the realistic time period where we could renegotiate or refund? Or
Oh, the callable, yeah, typically 9 years. So we probably have flexibility to refund the last 3 years of the maturity. So, yeah, unless we decided to go down the private placement route, which we did 2 issues ago with the 2020 bonds. If we go the private placement route, sometimes you can get an earlier call if you're going with a bank. But I've got that on the schedule for, right around the time the board would authorize a parameters resolution. We'd look at that lowest cost method of sale and the best time to go to market. I mean, your AAA is very strong, so a public sale has always served you well, including on the last issue. But, sometimes the banks have tremendous deals out there too, and they will give more flexibility in a private placement scenario. So that's a bridge we will want to cross closer to February in terms of the lowest cost method of sale.
Yeah, so the point of that question is, there's, call it a local maximum, within the range of being able to forecast is the spring interest rates. And, over the course of the next 9 years, if the interest rates drop then down to, 2%, we're as you've been pointing out, we're borrowing at a good time for the next 3 to 6 months, but 2 to 3 years from now, in the rearview mirror, it'll be one of the worst times that we could borrow. So when you look at it that way, it seems to me that there's some advantage to having a shorter term, less time that we're paying 4.5% when the going rate might be 2%. Somewhere 4 or 5 years out type of thing. So I think locking in at a local potential maximum has some downsides.
Well, I thought you were going with the other argument, which is it's going to go up, and either choice is a good choice. That's what I mean. I think
yeah,
you could equally
the 10-year, if you can do it, if you can renegotiate with 3 years ago, we could renegotiate sooner.
Yeah.
There'd
But
be
I mean,
less time that we'd be paying 4% versus 2%.
right. But I mean, big picture, now's a good time.
Yeah, now's a good time to go for a bond.
Yeah.
It's just the question between 10 and 12 is.
Yeah, who knows what the future is going to bring.
Right. And on the 10-year option, you don't have that many. I mean, you might get 1 year to refund if rates do go, where you're kind of thinking if we have a recession and they go low again. on the 12 and a half year option, you have 3 years you can renegotiate. So, there's more bonds that you could call in the longer option.
So it sounds like there's some consensus among the board that now is a good time to go for this issuance. And the discussion really is which option is going to be best, and we have some time to make that decision. If I'm hearing the board correctly, though, moving toward that January 23rd board meeting and authorizing that resolution seems like it makes sense to the board. And I'm also, I hope I'm not too far out on a limb, but authorizing that 11.2 to give us the maximum amount of flexibility seems to make sense. And then the board can make some decisions after that about option 1 versus option 2. Would that be a fair summary of the direction we're getting?
That's a good summary.
Great. Great. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. Again, sorry I wasn't there in person today.
We're glad to have you either way. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so board members, if it's okay, I'm going to continue on. I think this next little bit should be quick, and then we'll take a break. This brings us to public comment, but I do not see anyone here to address the board. So is there any old business? Any new business? Okay, at that point, we will adjourn to executive session. May I have a motion?
I move to adjourn to executive session to discuss specific employees and special education programs and other matters relating to individual students.
May I have a second?
Second.
Motion having been made and seconded, will the clerk please call the roll?
John Cesaretti,
Yes.
Ann Hart,
Yes.
Lonnie Kim,
Yes.
Rick Panzica,
Yes.
Lisa Schneider-Fabes,
Yes.
Aaron Stone,
Yes.
Amy Pan.
Yes. Motion carried. We are now adjourned to executive session and the time is 10:08.